Hello, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and healthcare enthusiasts. Welcome to episode 18 of the Decoding AI in Healthcare series. I am Dr. Harshita Gupta, your host. Today, we are delving into AI and genomics. We are excited to have experts joining us who bring a wealth of knowledge to our discussion on AI and genomics. Firstly, allow me to introduce Anu Acharya, the founder and CEO of Mapmygenome, a company that offers preventive genomic services in India. Anu's pioneering work integrates machine learning and AI to offer comprehensive genomic services, aiming to democratize preventive healthcare. She has garnered numerous accolades, including the WTI Award from the Niti Aayog and recognition as a young global leader by World Economic Forum. Welcome, Anu.
Thank you so much. It's fantastic to see all of you here.
Yeah, and next we have Dipu Patel, a digital health consultant renowned for her blend of clinical expertise and tech-driven patient empowerment. Welcome, Dipu.
Thank you.
And we have Dr. Amit Kumar Dey, a visionary in the medical innovation and AI entrepreneurship, bridging the gap between technology and healthcare. Welcome, Dr. Amit.
Thank you very much.
All of our esteemed speakers bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table, and we are privileged to have them here today to explore the fascinating intersection of AI and genomics. So without any further ado, I hand over the baton to Dr. Amit.
Thank you very much, Rashita, and welcome everyone to the 18th episode of MedAI podcast, Decoding AI in Healthcare. And as always, I'm really glad to be here with Dipu. And today we are going to talk about genomics, human genomics, something that is going to be forming the base of precision personalized medicine as we go ahead in healthcare. And I'm so glad that Anu could give us some time out of a busy schedule and she could join us on this podcast to educate us clinicians and researchers about the fantastic work that she's doing in the back end, widely in the domain of human genomics. So warm welcome to you, Anu, and really thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
So before Deepu and I get into the usual set of questions that we usually have on artificial intelligence to our guests in the podcast, Anu, to start with, we would really love to know about you and the work that you're doing at Mapmygenome. And also, if you could give us an introduction to our viewers and audience about what exactly is human genomics and why is it actually important to understand this from the context of clinical medicine. Anu?
Thank you. So as a background, I got into this fascinating world of genomics about 24 years ago, pretty much at the same time that the Human Genome Project was getting completed. So around that time, I had no experience in this space, but it was so fascinating that I actually gave up my job, moved to India, and started my first company called Ossimum Bio. And Ossimum Biosolutions was one of the first companies in genomics, bioinformatics, as it was called more at that point. And we started that. Over a period of the next 12 years, which I won't go into too much of detail, we became one of the largest genomic services companies worldwide. We had acquired 3 companies, mostly outside. All 3 were outside of India. The first in Germany, the second in Netherlands, and the third in the US. And so we had a lot of a wealth of information that was useful for pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and we were working with research institutes in India, working with large pharma biotechs for both the IT information systems, like lab information systems, the bioinformatics software products that we had created, but also we were one of the earliest to drive, sequencing in India, doing microarrays, actual printing of these arrays and oligonucleotides and so on. So we did a lot of different things in those first 12 years as we existed as Ossimum Biosolutions. But there was something that bothered me, and I think that was that, we were doing all these great work for companies that were creating drugs and doing a lot of things. We were helping them submit some of the data to the FDA, EPA, and so on. But the average person around us did not know how to use it. The average clinician did not know how to use a lot of this technology that we've been working on for so many years. So about 11 years ago exactly, we launched Mapmygenome, and we launched it with one product at that point of time. And that product, which some people might still remember, because it was the first time we were launching something that could be used even by an average person, right? There was no phlebotomist, there was nothing. You order a test kit comes home, and you take a saliva swab and you send it back. The idea was that can we help people understand your genetic predisposition to certain diseases, but also understand if you have certain traits and how you might be at risk for, let's say, bad cholesterol, good cholesterol, and things like that. So we started with a few things over there, but we said, instead of doing it the way a lot of companies in the US were doing it, we wanted to make sure that we could actually give them actual guidance in terms of what would you do with that information. So we added to that genetic counseling right from day one. And we said we help people understand, because ultimately this is not something that even medical professionals are trained in. And it is not something that an average consumer is going to understand when you tell them that you have a risk for type 2 diabetes, but you might be completely healthy at this time. So those were the kind of things that we started with. And because of that, because of the trust that we started creating with the genetic counselors and the reports that we were giving, we started adding smaller products to the mix. We started adding then clinical products to the mix. And so today, I think Mapmygenome has a wide variety of genomics portfolio, if I will. There is the whole set of the preventive part where we do a lot of longevity-based products, whether it's the microbiome or the epigenetics or products for beauty, fitness, wellness, and even ancestry. So these all is what we would consider as preventive genomics. And then we have this clinical part of our business, which is called the Mapmygenome Diagnostics, where we focus around reproductive health and oncology and rare diseases and so on. So that's sort of what the two different divisions of the company does. And each one of them actually helps clinicians as well, right? It is just that the preventive part can be easily understood by non-clinicians also. But to give an example of the kind of products that we may have, even on the preventive side, we have a product, for instance, which is called MedSynapse, which is more about looking at 165 drugs and seeing if they are whatever your standard dosage as a medical doctor is the right thing for this person, or whether the dosage needs to be changed, or whether the drug needs to be changed. So we would give you evidence on where this information is found, why is this necessary, and what you can do about it. So that's something that the doctor makes a decision on, but we provide the information and the evidence for that. So that is one part, right? I can go into a lot of details on many other things, but I'll let you.
Yeah. So we'll come and unravel that through the course of this podcast. So just to try and understand for our clinician friends, whenever we talk about genetic testing, we always mean, and most of the time it revolves around cancer, oncology health, and the reproductive health, like you rightly said. But I was quite fascinated by some of your publications, where you kind of looked at, there was one paper that you looked at, I think an adiponectin gene polymorphism that kind of predicts how an individual's sort of epigenetics could sort of be shaping up their metabolic health. Right. And there were also another paper that you were screening on type 2 diabetes individuals. So give us an idea about how genetic screening and genomics and understanding of the genomics could actually make an impact in the real ground zero level, in terms of preventive metabolic health.
I think that's a great part. I think that's one of the areas that I'm myself personally more fascinated with, because I come from Rajasthan, and my genes have a lot of risk that they carry, right? Both from nurture.
Same here.
Yeah.
I come from Gujarat. It's the same thing.
Same thing. The neighbors over there. So essentially, I think, when I looked at my genetic risk, and I found that, I'm at 2 times more than the average person. So what we do in risk predisposition is that we understand which markers. So if you think about it as, you have 22,000 genes, but you have, 3.2 billion base pairs. In that, there are certain markers that predispose us to a particular disease, right? And we usually would use what we call as the genome-wide association studies, for instance, that you use to understand if there is a particular marker. And these are typically found in a lot of different publications, or you could do it from your own database, right? So let's say we found for type 2 diabetes, there are 10 markers, for instance, that show us that on this particular gene, there is this particular marker, and that contributes to this. And as long as these are replicated and well studied, and let's say you're able to find it for those specific populations, you would then use that information into calculating what we call as a polygenic risk score, which basically means that you're looking at multiple genes. You are then assessing a risk to calculate that so that you can then create that algorithm for coming up with the scoring mechanisms for each of that. So I think one of the papers that you mentioned, which was a paper that we recently did in Nature, was basically looking at our type 2 diabetes and comparing it with also not only our database, but also at the UK Biobank and others. And that showed more a predisposition within the Indian population as well. So the idea was that, can we understand risk, and how do you make sure that if you can understand risk, that you actually use that information to then prevent the disease. So for instance, I might be at twice the risk, but I don't want to get diabetes. So once you know that that's part of your genetic makeup, you try harder to ensure that you are eating right, you are exercising right, because ultimately I think a large part of your epigenetics is coming from what you're eating and what you're exercising, not only your genes. So I think that's basically the main thing that we think about when we are creating these products, that the idea is not to scare people that you have a risk, but the idea is that because you have a risk, you need to try a little bit harder. It's like when you know that, sometimes for some people losing weight is harder, right? Now, if you know that you have a genetic risk, you will have to try a little bit harder. It's the same thing about what you do in other things. If you can measure it, you can act upon it. But if you can't measure it, it becomes harder. Then it becomes more vague. Then you don't yet have the disease, so you wait for the disease to manifest. And by the time the disease manifests, it becomes probably too late to actually then say, can I go from here and do a diabetes reversal, right? That's a harder road to take than saying, I know I have a risk, I know I have a family history, but can I now do something about it when I'm in my 30s and 40s rather than wait till I reach my 50s, for instance?
Yeah, just to simplify for our varied audience, it's always beyond clinicians that are our viewers. So genetics is what we are born with. That's what forms our structure. And epigenetics is actually how we are responding to the environment around us. So while, yes, we can understand our genetics, but the core genetic structure, of course, we can't change, but we can do a lot to our epigenetics. And I think that's what Anu is talking about. And that's where the whole essence of primordial prevention actually comes, in preventive health. And having said that, even we have seen that how important it is that child who is actually in the womb of a diabetic mother is actually going to carry a metabolic memory of having a diabetes. Somebody who is a gestational diabetes will give birth to a child, and that child will have a high risk. So we actually know that this genetic structure and the makeup of an individual is actually formed, and it's actually created so much in the womb right from there, even before birth. And that kind of gives in so much add-on, after we are born, it gives in so much add-on with the epigenetics, and that kind of shapes us. So if somebody can give us an idea about how these epigenetics are behaving in us and can actually help people understand that can actually go a long way in changing that individual's approach towards his life. It's like, we can't choose our parents, but you can definitely choose who your spouse and who your friends are going to be. It's kind of like that. So we can actually make those right choices at the right point of time in our life to kind of prevent these metabolic diseases which can largely be preventable. So that's a fantastic work you're doing there. Deepu, let's get a little into AI now, or anything that comes into your mind.
Maybe
well, I think one thing I was gonna start with, I think, is how you've been doing this research for now 20 plus years. You have been at the forefront of research and the shifting landscape of research, and now comes along AI. So how is AI currently being integrated into genomics, genomic research, and what do we anticipate, or what do you anticipate being the larger significant movements or aspects of genomics being impacted by AI?
Thank you. So I think, AI was always part of genomics in many ways, right? Because we always had large data sets to manage. And it was not possible to not use machine learning to actually manage some of these data sets to come up, whether you want to come up with a scoring mechanism or anything like that. So we always did a little bit of machine learning, to come up with these risk scoring, the algorithms that we do. But I think where we have come to now, at least at Mapmygenome, was to say that that you have these like non-modifiable markers, which are your hereditary markers. But you also have information that is coming through your things that change, right? Like your blood tests, your epigenetics, your microbiome, and your lots of other pieces of information that are constantly changing, right? How do you actually take all that information and then make one score that is easy to understand for the patient and for the doctor, right? You have too much information overload. How do you actually use that information? And I think the best way to do that is by using AI to put that pieces of information together, right? So we call that as the gbio.me, where we are saying that you have the genetic markers, you have the biomarkers, your biochemistry and everything else. And you have, of course, your age, your height, weight, and all of that you can also put into that. And so currently we have been able to do for a certain set of diseases that we have, where we are saying we take this information and we'll give you a score that will help you understand what your cardiovascular risk truly is today, right? For instance, we can help you understand what your specific organ is. We haven't yet launched this commercially yet, but that's something that we have done, where we said we'll use machine learning, we'll come up with these parameters, validate it with data sets that we have, that we've purchased, and from like databases like UK Biobank and others, and make sure that we can actually create this as something that physicians as well as consumers can use. Right? And I think across the world, we are seeing that happen. We're seeing that machine learning is being used to sort of put these pieces of information together. And that is one aspect, which is the bigger, the larger goal in terms of saying, how do I help someone through this journey of well-being, right? By connecting the dots, if you will, or as an integrations. Yeah. But when I think about genomics and AI, there are many more pieces to it, right? One easy place that we are seeing a lot of this happening, for instance, is that of base calling. So in instruments, right? So for instance, if you're looking at sequencer, you are constantly doing multiple times, you sequence the same set of, you have a sample and you're constantly doing like the 30x coverage or 100x coverage. Basically means you're running through it 30 times or 100 times to make sure you get the right kind of the base that is called, right? Now, some of the instrument companies like an Oxford Nanopore and others, what they're doing is to say, you sequence it, and maybe you don't know which base is there exactly, right? So you want to be able to understand what base that is. You can actually use AI to actually impute that, right? And I think that's one where instrument manufacturers are using a base calling mechanism of saying which one, is it an A or a T or a C or a G? Because you have run it many times, and let's say 7 times you got a T, once you got an A, you figure out what that is. So that is one mechanism that you do find where you have something where it can be used at the instrument level. Mm-hmm. The second would be where you want to understand, you want to do a variant calling, right? So whenever you do like large sequences that you are looking at, and let's say you do the whole exome, which is about 2% of your genome, it's still, you're still dealing with about 6 to 8 GB of data, right? And typically you run this through a pipeline, which helps you to understand and get you the right variant, right? So you want to understand if you're carrying a pathogenic mutation or not. Typically, you are able to run it through a pipeline, and then you run it through your databases and other newer databases that are there to make sure that you have the most accurate information. And here is where AI is very incredibly useful, because you are able to do that variant calling better, right? So you can do variant callings better. You can do literature mining better. You can do summarization better. You can do a large amount of information that is there. You can actually now make this much more easier to do, both for the bioinformatician, but also for the person who has to understand this, right? And I think that's where the value lies. That, you know, for a clinician, what does it mean, right? What does it mean when we say this is pathogenic? Right? What does it mean when we say this is VOUS, right? Which is a variant of unknown significance, right? Is there something new that is there? So I think here is where AI is also extremely helpful to say, you know, how do I actually understand that, and how do I tell that? There are many more such examples, but
yeah. I just wanted to pull out the phrase that you said at the very beginning, and before Amit can ask his follow-up or next question, is that AI has been used in this space for a really long time. In fact, the Human Genome Project used AI, and we wouldn't be where we are. And so I think for our audience, what Amit and I have always said, that this is, it's math, it's old math. It's just that we have been applying it in the background, and now we're seeing it because it's actually applicable to our daily lives and to clinical practice. And so we're now seeing the fruits of the labor of people like you, Anu, who in the background have been doing all of this work, and we're going to be able to then leverage it for improved clinical and patient outcomes. And so again, old technology, old math, but new applications is where I think we're seeing this, and it's going to change the way we provide care.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think AI has been around for so long, but
yeah,
always been in the background, right? Like I think my brother, when he did his PhD, it was in AI, but that was in the 80s. So I think, you know, things have changed so much that today it touches everybody's life. And I think, you know, it is things like, you know, writing something which earlier would take a lot of effort and you might have creative blocks. Now you don't, right? Because you can ask Gemini, or you can ask ChatGPT, or you can ask Bing or whoever. So I think that made a difference. But I wanted to add one thing. We were discussing about the genome and the epigenome, and maybe a simple way for people to understand is that, you know, if you think about a sentence that's like a gene, for instance, like, but the punctuations in that would be what would be your epigenetics, right? Basically,
Very
thinking
nice.
about what has changed when
Great
it comes to
example.
the meaning of the sentence. That is your epigenetics, because it's what has been added. So whether it is a methyl group that has been added, or the histones that are tightly now opening up for the gene to actually start doing something, that makes it easier for all of us to say that what has happened to that genetic code, because it's supposed to be the same. What really changed? So that's where those punctuation marks make the difference on turning on, turning off certain genetic material.
Very, very, very interesting example you've given there. And, you know, I guess a lot of groundbreaking work will be happening in the domain of genomics using artificial intelligence. And yes, you rightly said, the whole buzz now we are talking so much about AI is because of generative AI. And also because now we can also have something called synthetic data. So I think that is also something that would be a huge use case in the domain of genomics. So I'm sure a lot of groundbreaking work has also happened. And one such that I would really like you to highlight us about, and that was also quite highlighted, you know, ever since we had generative AI and, you know, a large language model coming in, is about CRISPR. So CRISPR is clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats, which is basically a technology used for editing genomes. So could you tell us, our audience, and also to us, because we are also very new to this thing, so that about what exactly CRISPR does and how actually the intersect of artificial intelligence can actually augment about what's exactly done using CRISPR or any other thing that is in this domain.
So I think if you take the same example of, let's say you have some sentences written and all that, I think what CRISPR is doing is essentially doing what we do as a cut, copy, paste, right? Like you're finding that specific region that you want to take and cut it and paste it with something else. And for instance, so you are able to now add to that a completely different path that that gene or that information that is there for the genetic material to be read. So this has become relatively easy to use. It can be done by most labs, I think, that you can do CRISPR. Now there are many applications of CRISPR. I think during COVID, there were some CRISPR-based diagnostic means of being able to say, can I find out if someone has COVID or not by looking at gene editing possibilities, right? So one was, can you use it for a diagnosis purpose? And some diagnostic products were created for that. The other also was that you can find today several ways of like looking at antimicrobial resistance and a few other spaces that you can use CRISPR for. You can use it for certain kinds of drug therapy, gene therapies that are there. The more interesting part, which is not yet approved, would be when it actually happens at the embryo level, right? Which is not approved by anywhere across the world. But right now, what you're doing with anything on CRISPR would be more targeting for that person, right? So when you come up with some sort of a therapy, you're doing it for that particular individual to solve a particular problem, right? When you look at the therapeutic value. When you're doing a diagnostic, you're just using it as a diagnostic. Now, CRISPR becomes more in the ethical and the other domains is when you actually can make changes at the embryo level, because then you can say that I will decide what features I want in my child and then be able to do it, right? Like, of course, it's not as easy as cut, copy, paste, but I think in a simplistic way that you could actually design that you want X and Y and Z features. Right? So I think that's what you're looking at, that when you look at gene editing, that you potentially right now can do it for that particular person. And when you look at, can you change it for the germline, which would be for the next few generations? I think that's where the ethical debates come. For anyone who has a big problem in their family, I think would love it, but we don't yet know the full implication of what that might have in terms of future generations and other things. But there have been trials. I think there have been babies that were born in China, for instance, many years ago. So it's not that this hasn't happened. I think we are looking at potentially a future where maybe this might become something that we might see at least somewhere in our lifetime.
The CRISPR, what I've heard is in the malaria prevention.
That is another thing.
Yeah. I'd love for you to elaborate on that, because I find that really fascinating.
So I think basically you're saying that when you look at any microbe and you are trying to say that how do you change the sequence over there so that doesn't then become a disease in the human, right? And so and once I remember I was in some talk, I remember asking this question, this many years ago, without knowing that this will actually happen in over the next few years, that you can actually figure out how to fix problems in the vector rather than rather than in the human.
The recipient. Yeah, exactly.
and so when I asked it was a very curious question that I asked in some conference. But the reality is, I think now they can do that, right? So you do it, you change the sequence over there, and I think what it does is that you can make sure that set of mosquitoes will breed more, and therefore you will not get the disease, right? So I think that's sort of a very interesting way of saying, can I change something so that we stop it at the, before it gets to you, right? So in some ways, a preventive way of looking at disease in a completely different way of saying for infectious diseases. And I think there are more examples that I'm sure right now are not coming into my mind, but there are many such ways of using CRISPR in future research.
So, I mean, just to sort of emphasize that, getting into genomics is so much even important for public health, and there is so much of preventing public health concerns. Let's just talk about infectious diseases like dengue and malaria, or even chikungunya in India and other parts of Southeast Asia, and especially which are vector-borne diseases. If these can be addressed by simple gene editing, it would do so much of good to public health. And I'm sure AI would just augment these researches, at so many levels going ahead. So, Anu, coming to another part, and you mentioned this in the beginning of our podcast about using, uh, using genomics in personalized medicine to sort of predict how an individual responds to certain group of drugs and what would be an ideal drug to choose, especially, let's say, for example, in cardiovascular health. Could you enlighten about us on that and kind of work that you're doing, and how could also AI enhance those kind of work?
Sure. So I think when we look at pharmacogenomics, which is basically saying, how do you respond to a particular drug? I think most medical doctors, I'm sure all of you all know, that some medicines don't work on some people. Sometimes people look at it as saying that they understand it based on their caste even. I think there are certain types of drugs that that won't work on the Vaishya community, for instance. And I think Dr. Dipu, I think since you're in emergency medicine, I think I'm sure you're familiar with that as well, right? Like there are certain drugs that uh, don't necessarily work, and they might even be harmful or fatal for that person. Right. You're in the ICU, you're injecting so many medicines, you're not sure if that can potentially have a fatal effect on someone. So what we do in pharmacogenomics is basically saying that you can either be a normal metabolizer, and so if a particular drug, 500 mg or whatever is your standard dosage is okay, then I think that's fine, right? So if I'm, let's say, want to take metformin or clopidogrel or any of these drugs, if I'm a normal metabolizer, then the standard dosage is fine for me. I might be someone who might be a ultra rapid metabolizer or a slow metabolizer, which means that my genes either are metabolizing this drug too fast or too slow. And in both cases, I think you might need to change the way you are looking at what dosage you might need, or sometimes you might just need to change the medication completely, right? So I think that's what you're doing, that you are able to understand based on the genotypes like CYP2D19, C19, and so on. So these ones are what you typically see, while there are many more. And based on that, we tell people if it is green, then whatever the doctor said is fine. If it is orange or red, then we'll give evidence in terms of where was this found, right? Was this found in the CPIC guidelines? Was it found in the FDA guidelines or the Swissmedic, or wherever else this evidence was found? And what is that evidence, right? What did that say? Does it mean that you need to change the dosage? What does it mean? Will a new drug have to be administered for this patient, right? So those are the kind of things that we help people understand. Ultimately, the physician or the doctor will actually make a call based on understanding their clinical symptoms and others in terms of what they need to do. But it has been extremely helpful. I know, for instance, my mom's case, dad used metformin all his life, but my mom's case, she actually started taking metformin and she was actually not doing so well. And then I happened to see her, ask her what she was taking, and then we have to change her medication, right? So I think it depends on, how do we use that information We saw that, we went to a doctor, doctor said, fine, we'll give you something else. And I think that's basically what happened. We are finding another huge use case in psychiatry, right? Because I think in psychiatry, one, it takes a long time for you to figure out if it is working or not working.
Yes.
So, antidepressants and others. And so it's important to be able to understand that if you are a slow metabolizer or a fast metabolizer, or you're a regular metabolizer, and whether this drug is likely to work for you or not. So I think currently we are able to look at quite a large number of drugs, and most of these are currently available for most of the clinicians to see. They can look at like the CPIC guidelines, or they can look at the FDA, the guidelines that are there. But sometimes these guidelines might be spread over multiple different information sources. So AI is another great tool to be able to pick out from where you can get. And what we would do is to help you understand and then tell you which, which is green, which is orange and yellow, and what you can do about it.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking of the patients who I've seen in the past who'll say, I'm really sensitive to medication, right? Or give me the lowest dose. Like, and these are common things that patients say,
Yeah.
but you now have a quantitative metric to say,
Absolutely.
yeah, they are right, or maybe they're not and they need a higher dose. And I'm thinking about the downstream implications of this sort of information as clinicians to have, where you are titrating not only the dose of a particular antibiotic, for example, but the duration. You may not need 10 days of an antibiotic. You may need 3 days, depending on what your genetic information is telling us. And on the flip side, you may need a longer course. So I'm thinking about what this singular data point and how it informs the level of care that we are then able to really precisely provide for patients. Because I can tell you, I mean, and you're both nodding your head, like we've had patients who'll say, I'm really sensitive to, and then
Yes.
in terms of psychiatry, it's a lot of trial and error, and these medications are not easy to take. They come with a lot of side effects. If you need to switch a patient from one medication to another, there's a washout period for a lot of these medications that the body has to go through. So I can imagine like trying to really use this data to say, this is the likelihood, 80% chance that this is going to be the one that works, and you don't have to go through a 6-month trial and error period for these patients. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and just to add, pharmacogenomics would just open up a whole new space into precision medicine, and that would so much improve pharmacovigilance. That is another aspect, pharmacovigilance will improve. I mean, still today, like you rightly said, Deepu, it's always about trial and error. And we often see that, there are so many cases of patients ending up in the hospitalizations because of just over medication or under medication, because of this trial and error. So if you can have something ready at hand that can really tell you that how your body is going to be responding to a certain group of drugs, it would be such a powerful tool in the hand of a clinician when they're using to choose something out of a basket of medicine. And I think in preventive health, let's say for even diabetes now, we've got such an array of medications which are available as a basket. We call it, you're addressing the omnious octate pathophysiology of the disease, where you have one medicine targeting each aspect of this, the 8 process of pathophysiology. And I think the same goes in cardiology and other domain of preventive health. So if you can actually have some kind of a genomic methodology of kind of telling you that, what's going to be the right medicine that will give you the maximum efficacy and the maximum bioavailability in terms of, how you are going to be metabolizing the drug, like Anu said, a slow, fast, or a regular metabolizer. I think it's going to be a fascinating tool in the hand. And I think for all our clinicians out there, Anu, could you just give us an idea that how, I mean, let's say for the doctors at India, how they could actually reach out to this kind of a powerful tool through you, and how this is actually readily available to them if somebody wants to use it right away?
So, I mean, it's there on our website. They can reach out to us either way. And we can have kits kept in the clinics. And it's not So we also found interesting things that initially doctors would come for one specific medication, right? So for instance, we had a lot of requests for clopidogrel or something else. But they soon realized that it was probably easier to just get the whole array of product, like the entire thing, because there's no difference in cost, right? So you're getting all of this for 7,000 rupees. You get every 165 drugs, versus if you're probably spending just a little bit less for doing one. And it's better to have a profile of everything for the patient, because you now have that on record that you can use to guide for anything in the future for that particular patient, right? So it becomes quite powerful for them to be able to actually use this information, not just for that specific drug that they're giving, but for anything that in the future they might need to be administered for that patient.
This is
Fascinating. And I
fantastic.
think,
I mean,
yeah,
I'm jealous that we don't have something similar here in the US.
I'm really going to start using it right away in my clinic. I can assure you that. I mean, that's going to be such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
All right, Dipu, what's the next question?
Well, I mean, I think we're gonna let's shift gears and talk about the ethical and privacy concerns around these. Here in the US, we have insurers that end up not reimbursing for a lot of these tests, but putting those aside, there are several areas where do we want to know this information? What are the ethics around this? And some especially some like the degenerative diseases come to mind actually front in terms of, do I really want to know at the age of 13 whether I'm going to have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or Huntington's chorea? Actually, this is another one that keeps coming up. And so, I mean, in terms of the ethics, and then privacy, I think is a little bit separate, but in terms of ethics of knowing this up front and what are the implications of this from a clinical point of view as well as a patient point of view, right? What are the concerns that we have?
So I think, one is, it depends if it's a consumer or even a doctor. I think you can decide what information you want, right? So for instance, you can say, I just want to get information on nutrition and fitness, or we also have, for instance, something called juniors, Genome juniors, where we don't give any age related, like things like your Alzheimer's or cancers, things like that, right? So we said we'll only leave it for some of the more interesting traits like your behavior, your cardiometabolic health, little bit on that. But we don't want to give you information which would be, you might not want to know when you are like 15 years old or 13 years old, whether you are going to get Alzheimer's disease, right? I think you can always decide to upgrade your information once you maybe reach 40, 45 or something like that, right? So I think one is that we have created separate products so people can decide what they want to take. It's not like we are forcing them to take all the information. So that's number one. The second thing is that for each test that we do, we also have consent from both the patient or the consumer, as the case may be, that they understand. And there are three types of consent that they do. One, they understand that this is a genetic test and it's not like a biochemical test. That they understand that implications of that. And the second is that they can always decide if they want us to use their anonymized data as part of the research, if we are trying to make our products better. And the other is the third kind of consent that we typically look at is if they are a minor, then the parent should be able to understand that this is what you do. One is consent, and I think that that is one of the most important pieces. So you decide what information you want, you make sure that the consent is there. And then the third, of course, is, I think you mentioned Huntington's chorea, and we had actually came across a serious ethical case within Mapmygenome, and everything was followed right. But I think the end result was not so great because I think this woman did not know that there was a Huntington's gene in the family. They were planning a baby. The husbands, they convinced her to give consent for a test. There were doctors in the family. And so there was a prescription that was written. And then they found that the gene was there in the girl's mother that did not end up too well from a just social point of view. I think it bothered a lot of us that something like this can also happen. So there are such challenges. We did everything that do you follow the right ethical thing or not? But in this case, I think it came from the patient and from the doctor. And we, as a genetic testing company, we can't change how they view their own, what they can do. But I think it does raise some questions, right? Like, is this something that should be done? Can this be the reason to deny somebody something or to accept? I think those are definitely questions that one can think about. But in more than most cases, 99.9% of the cases, it helps people in making decisions about, their babies, or it helps them make decisions about the treatment options, or it helps them make decisions or understand the diagnosis and so on. And in this case, also it did, but it was just that the final outcome was probably not what anyone else would have assumed.
Well, and that I think highlights an important point about all of this work, including AI, which is our ethical concerns from a medical point of view and a research point of view are still within the guise of the social constructs that we live in. And we have to do a better job of balancing that and almost, and not almost, taking each case as an individual and what choices that patient wants to make and chooses to make in the context of the information they've been given. And this is it's at the core of our bioethics classes that we've all taken, right? It's the core of evidence-based medicine, a course that I teach. And so really it's really that important that we don't forget the social constructs that under which our ethics, our medical ethics are underpinned on.
Yeah, and just we are in a juncture where we are so much focused on patient-centric care. Everything around just revolves around doing the best for the patient in the most personalized way. And genomics can go a long way in helping that. Yes, there could be a couple of odd one ethics cases, but majority way. So I know public awareness is also going to be a very important key here. I mean, people should also be aware of it, about how the genomics and being aware of these particular genetic tricks could actually shape up their lives, in terms of these preventive diseases. But, there is always a gap between the research and the ground level clinical workers. And how can we bridge this gap? I think this is a very important question. And I think it's the whole podcast today is also an attempt, beyond the AI and the genomics, it's an attempt to bridge this gap. And how can we work collaboratively to bridge this gap with the information coming up from the ground zero clinician, funneled up to you guys as the researcher doing fantastic work in the back end, and then getting it reciprocated in the form of some kind of a powerful tool that can actually empower the clinicians.
So I think it is, I think from the time 11 years ago to now, I think there's been a quite a big change, right? At least there is some level of awareness amongst most of the clinicians community that genetic testing is available, right? Maybe not at the level that we would like it to be. So I think, definitely a podcast like this is absolutely a fantastic idea for getting some of that message across. And you realize that, there might be a lot of people within your circle that might be like overhearing all the information that you're sending. But there are so many more people that probably will never hear that you even exist, right? And I think that's something that we all have to work on, because, while what we do might benefit clinicians and what clinicians do benefit us, I think sometimes we don't make that connect, like always, right? So, and you make it in a certain smaller part rather than, it being relatively well spread out. So I think there is a lot of room to improve in terms of communication, both from our side, and we have tried our best to make sure that we ourselves have, a podcast, or we invite doctors. We also put out a lot of information on our website, and I don't know if you've been able to see that. So what we've done now is we've created a resource page called learn.mapmygenome, and there you can search for anything, and we'll give you information on what is the implication of the gene, what product might help the doctor, and so on. And I think this came about because we were getting a lot of questions that were coming from clinicians. And we realized that it's not just the clinicians, it was also our sales team to try to understand what is actually included in each of these tests that are there. So I think we created that resource page so that people can look through that entire thing. Let's say you found some bacteria, you want to understand that bacteria. Even that will be there. Or you're looking at longevity or anything. So we've tried to make it easy. And I think, any feedback from any clinicians would be helpful, because this is still early stages of our resource out there for everybody to see.
Yeah. And also, I think understanding the epigenetics and the gut microbiome, I think that is a future
Yeah.
research. And I think there's a lot of aspect that, we can collaborate and work on that.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are doing, we do have a gut microbiome test. So, and I think that's fascinating, because right now, I think pretty much every disease can be linked to the gut
Yes.
microbiome.
Yes, it leads to the gut.
Who knew? Who knew? We didn't even talk about it when we were in school, right? It was not even yeah. Well, this has been a great I have a question about the future as you look forward. What do you see the role of generative AI being as genomics continues to grow and really make an impact? Are there specific areas or roles that you see generative AI playing a role in this?
So I think, some of the things, for instance, if you go to a medical, like a database where genomics scientists and others are seeing, I think that information is quite complicated, right? So I think the most important role is, how do you create the actionability in a changing world, right? So you have constantly changing information. How do you make sure that simplify and make it actionable? So I think that's one of the biggest roles that generative AI can do, because if you think about it, we have information, like if you go to our Learn page, you'll see there are 22,000 genes. And you are also looking at, at least 200, 300 types of bacteria and other microbes that you're looking at. You're looking at many other epigenetic marks and so on. So this is a constantly changing world. And while we've tried to create this resource for you, I think what we want to ultimately create is to say, make it even easier for clinicians. And I think that's where we want to use generative AI to put these pieces together.
Well, from your mouth to the clinical research bench to our clinics, I hope that is going to be a reality soon.
And precision medicine is actually going to be something that at least we will get to see, as long as, till the days we practice. That is something that I'm waiting to see, And
Definitely.
it's such a powerful thing to have, if you can predict the right thing for the right person. That's what the essence of, whenever we talk about technology, AI, understanding the genome, is right. It's like doing the right thing for the right person at the right point of time. That's what makes the whole lot of difference in the domain of healthcare. I think we had a fascinating podcast today. Really, it's been so much of things that we ourselves learned, and it's been fascinating to have you. But before we wrap it up, of course, we have got a host of audience been listening to us patiently, and they always come up with some interesting questions. So, Harshita, do you have anything from our audience today?
Yes. So we'll take one question. How can AI assist in identifying non-coding regions of the genome that play crucial roles in gene regulation and disease susceptibility?
Excellent question.
So I think you are still looking at, when we do, for instance, the genome thing, they're not always on the coding regions, right? So you are looking at the non-coding region. In fact, a large number of markers are on the non-coding regions. So you are looking at those markers that are there. And I think when you're doing, whether it's a GWAS, so you're looking at a lot of these markers, typically they will be found on these non-coding regions. And so So I think it's a more, I think AI has been useful. Like I mentioned that for us, like right at the beginning, we always use machine learning to put these pieces
Yes.
together. And therefore, I think these non-coding regions are of great amount of importance. So while a lot of clinicians only want to see, let's say, an exonic region or the whole exome, I think there's so much more information that is there on the non-coding region, and which is why, when we do something like a genome patri or a cardio map and others, a lot of our markers are coming from non-coding regions.
So shedding more light into the dark. I think that's what AI is going to help us.
Yes.
Maybe more with generative AI, artificial general intelligence, and all that coming in, perhaps, in the upcoming years. So I guess these are all going to become a reality. I mean, it's a reality now. I mean, we can start using this in our practice. And I think to all my clinician friends out there, this is a domain that you really want to explore. If you are practicing today and you're looking to deliver more personalized care towards your patient, I think if you're practicing in India, then I think, it's a fascinating work that Anu and Mapmygenome is doing, and we can really explore this. And of course, it needs a lot of regulatory guidelines, a lot of regulatory approvals. Having said that, more robust research, and it requires much more robust clinician-driven real world evidence research. And I think that's what it's going to be more groundbreaking, as we go ahead. And I think the collaboration is going to be the key. Once again, thank you very much for joining in. And before we end, we've got a couple of minutes to go. I should announce that the next podcast episode is also going to be a very interesting one. And we're really delighted that we will be having Dr. William Brinson Wicks joining us. He is the CEO and director of Microsoft AI for Health. And they've recently published a book called AI for Good. And we will be taking that discussion about that book, as well as about all sorts of work that Microsoft is doing with using AI in the domain of health. So Dipu, you want to tell us when that podcast is going to be coming up?
Oh yeah, I knew you were going to put me. It is May. It's coming up. Now I have to pull up my calendar. Hold on one second. It is May 23rd.
Fantastic. I guess everybody should block that calendar, and we should really, understand, how, the big sharks are planning on with using AI ethically in a regulated way. And that's going to change the whole domain ecosystem of healthcare.
Sure to be a fantastic conversation.
Absolutely. And today's was equally fantastic. And I'm sure
Absolutely.
it will get more of my clinician friends intrigued into exploring this domain of genomics. And I'm really going to try out that medication predictor tool that Anu said in my clinics right away.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Over to Harshita.
Yeah. As we conclude this remarkable session, a big thank you to Anu Acharya, Dr. Dipu, and Dr. Amit for sharing your invaluable insights and perspectives. And also thank you to our incredible audience for tuning in. Stay tuned and be a vital part of the conversation. Until next time, take care and stay healthy. Goodbye.